This video will cover settlements, which form a key area in the geography syllabus. This video will specifically focus on an introduction to settlements, and later videos will focus on distinguishing specifically between rural and urban settlements. So when we look at settlements, what do we think about? Settlements become in range of different sizes and shapes. The exact definition of a settlement, and the one you should use, is a place where people live. It contains the buildings and systems that enable people to meet their needs. It is a grouping of people, activities, building structures, and communication links that function as a single integrated system. There are two main sort of terms that help in distinguishing settlements, and that is site and situation. It is very important to note the difference, and very often students get confused between their differences. You will definitely get a question on both site and a question on situation. So when we look at site, the site is the physical space or ground that the settlement occupies. It is the land under your feet. It is based on the needs of the people. Some of the site factors include availability of fresh water, fuel sources, aspect, soil fertility, drainage, access to transport, communication, grazing ground, microclimate, and defense. Then when we're looking at situation, situation refers to the location in relation to surrounding human and physical features. It is your position relative to your surroundings, or the settlement's position relative to its surroundings. Some examples include distance to the nearest town, so the surrounding environment, is it in a mountainous region, close to a coastline, as well as its availability and accessibility to surrounding transport routes. Then if we look at some important terms relating to rural settlements, we get a wet point site, sites that are close to a water supply. A dry point site is sites that avoid the risk of flooding. A defensive site, usually located on higher ground with a defensive advantage. The reason for higher ground is obviously you can see more land. Then the whole thing of aspect, which I have spoken about in one of the climatology videos. It is the direction of the settlement in relation to the sun. Is it north facing or south facing, and the effects that this can have both socially and economically. Then shelter. Obviously, you get your shelter away from the rain and wind. Trading point is settlements that occur along natural intersections of trade. Then we look at functions of a settlement. Functions is the main economic activity or purpose. Most settlements are multifunctional, but when they first formed, they had one function. Some different types of settlements indicating functions. You got a market town such as Magaliesburg, a seaside resort such as Plettenberg Bay, a fishing port, Paternoster or Saldanha Bay, an industrial town, an example would be Sasolburg, a dormitory town, Somerset West or Hazy View, and a port town, Durban or Port Elizabeth. Rural settlements are usually unifunctional with one main function and are predominantly involved in primary activities. Urban settlements, on the other hand, are usually multifunctional, i.e. more than one function, and they are involved in secondary, tertiary, and quaternary activities. Then we look at classification of settlements, either primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary settlements. Primary settlements involve the extraction of minerals, farming, fishing, forestry, and mining, the 3 F's and M. Secondary has got to do with processing of raw materials, milling or canning. Tertiary is provision of services, education, health, transport. And quaternary is looking at research such as medical or environmental. Then we go on to some further notes about classification of settlements. Settlements are classified according to the following criteria: their size, pattern, function, and complexity. When looking at the size, it's the physical size of a settlement, which usually corresponds to the size of its population. Pattern, the physical shape of a settlement and its position in relation to other settlements. Function, the purpose of the settlement, or what sort of activities does the settlement usually engage in. Complexity, the number of elements that exist in a settlement, such as its infrastructure, is it complex or very simple infrastructure, service provision, etc. The location of a settlement is always described using site and situation, which I obviously went through earlier on in the video. Then when we break it up, so obviously looking at a settlement size, some villages, some differences rather between rural and urban settlements. Your smallest settlement in terms of a rural setting is an isolated farmstead, a settlement which consists of a few buildings, 1 or 2 families, and mainly partakes in primary activities. Then comes a hamlet, which is a small grouping of a few farmsteads which may have a church but no shops or services, also involved in primary activities. Then we get a rural village, fairly large farming community. A church may be in the community, but there are no shops or services, also engaging in primary activities and below 10,000 people. Then if we start looking at urban settlements, you also get an urban village, which is a large farming community with limited shops and services, such as post office and a small school. Then if we look at a town, it's the smallest true urban settlement and provides the first bit of secondary activities. Then if we look at a city, it's a large settlement offering specialized services such as universities or an airport. A metropolis, a very large urban area consisting of a large city with surrounding suburbs and towns. Then if we look at a conurbation, it's a continuous urban area where towns and cities have merged. Then finally, the biggest of them all, a megalopolis, a sprawling urban area consisting of adjoining conurbations. An example of this is Bosniwash, which stands for Boston, New York, and Washington, which form a megalopolis on the east coast of America. Then we look at pattern, distinguishing between rural and urban. In terms of rural, dispersed or isolated, individual settlements that are far apart from each other, or nucleated settlements. Settlements and buildings are situated close to each other. A nucleated settlement in terms of an urban setting. Urban settlements can only be nucleated due to their large population and numerous activities. Then we look at the different functions. In terms of rural, mostly unifunctional, dominated by one activity, mostly primary activities, farming, fishing, forestry, and mining, that triple FM. If a rural area has shops, it becomes a service center, and I'll get into that later with central place theory. Then if we look at the function of urban settlements, they are multifunctional, a combination of integrated system of secondary, tertiary, and quaternary activities. Looking at the complexity in terms of rural setting, infrastructure and service provision is very basic with limited choices. In terms of an urban setting, infrastructure and service provision is complex and diverse. That concludes the video for the introduction to settlements. The next video will be on rural settlements. Thank you.